The morning sun streamed through the curtains, but instead of feeling rested, I woke with a weight in my chest. Daniel was already on his laptop, muttering into his headset, waving me off when I tried to say good morning. His life seemed stitched together by conference calls and unread messages, and I was merely background noise. I showered, dressed, and told myself I would spend the day exploring on my own. It sounded adventurous, but in truth, I was just escaping the suffocating presence of his absence when I stepped outside. I didn't expect to see Mark waiting near the cafe across from the resort. He greeted me like it was the most natural thing in the world, like he knew I would pass by eventually. I could have kept walking, told myself not to blur the lines, but instead I stopped. His ease disarmed me, and before I realized it, we were walking together along the shore. The conversation flowed without effort. He asked questions no one had asked me in years: what music I loved, what dreams I still held, what I would do if time and responsibility didn't chain me. I laughed at how unprepared I was to answer, because I hadn't thought of myself outside of Daniel's world in so long. Mark wasn't trying to impress me. That was what unsettled me most. He was simply present, fully in the moment, without distraction. I caught myself studying the way his words rolled, how his voice softened when he asked about the books that shaped my childhood, how he didn't look past me to something else more important. With him, there was no screen lighting up between us, no constant reminder that I wasn't enough. For hours, I forgot that I was supposed to be saving a marriage. Instead, I was rediscovering pieces of myself I had abandoned. Later that afternoon, Daniel joined me briefly at the poolside. His eyes stayed glued to his phone, and his responses to my questions were clipped, half-hearted. I asked if he wanted to take a walk on the beach at sunset, but he said he couldn't. He had a client call he couldn't miss. I smiled politely, but inside I felt hollow. I wanted him to look at me, to remember who I was, to see what I needed. He didn't. He hadn't in a long time. That evening, I returned to the bar almost unconsciously, pulled by something stronger than habit. Mark was there again, leaning casually against the counter. His smile was quiet, knowing, as though he understood the storm I carried inside me. He didn't pressure me, didn't even suggest we sit together, but I found myself sliding onto the stool beside him. One drink became two, then three. The conversations grew deeper, more personal. I spoke about Daniel, carefully at first, then with unguarded honesty. I admitted how invisible I felt, how our marriage had become an arrangement more than a connection. My voice shook with the vulnerability of confession, but Mark didn't interrupt. He simply listened. At some point, our laughter filled the spaces between words, that dangerous comfort when tension gives way to closeness. His hand brushed against mine when we both reached for a napkin, and instead of pulling away, I lingered. The air seemed heavier, the silence more loaded. When his fingers grazed mine again, I didn't resist. The heat of his touch spread through me like something forbidden, and yet I didn't want it to stop. We stepped outside, the night air thick with salt and the low hum of the ocean. I told myself I should walk away, that this was the point of no return, but my body betrayed me. When Mark leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper, every defense I had built crumbled. His lips touched mine, soft at first, then urgent, and my heart thundered with a mix of exhilaration and fear. It wasn't just a kiss, it was the confirmation of everything I had tried to deny. That we left the bar together, the world around us fading into background noise. I knew exactly what I was doing and exactly how wrong it was, but I didn't stop. In his arms, I felt a rush of being wanted, chosen, seen. The hours that followed blurred into sensations I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years: passion, release, aliveness. I gave in completely, abandoning the careful lines I had drawn to protect my vows. The guilt would come later, but in that moment, it was buried beneath the intoxication of desire. When morning came, the reality was undeniable. I woke tangled in sheets that weren't mine, the sound of waves breaking against the shore in the distance. Mark lay beside me, his breathing steady, peaceful, as though nothing about this was complicated. I stared at the ceiling, heart pounding, overwhelmed by the duality of what I felt, an ache of guilt twisting inside me, yet a lingering sweetness that made me want to stay. That I returned to my room eventually, quiet as a thief. Daniel was still asleep, his phone beside him, unread notifications lighting up the screen. I slid into bed beside him, my body tense with the memory of where I had been, what I had done. He stirred briefly, kissed my forehead without opening his eyes, and turned away. That simple, careless gesture crushed me more than anything else. I had crossed the line completely, betrayed the man I had once loved with every part of me, and yet in his indifference, it felt as though he would never even notice. The guilt grew sharper as the day went on. I replayed the night in fragments, the taste of Mark's lips, the warmth of his touch, the undeniable sense of being alive again. But alongside it was the sickening reminder that my marriage had cracked in a way that could never be repaired. I told myself it was just a moment, a mistake fueled by loneliness, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. It was the consequence of years of neglect, years of feeling unseen, and the terrifying realization that I had found something outside my marriage that Daniel hadn't given me in a long time. That night, lying awake next to my husband, I realized I couldn't return to who I had been before. I had crossed into new territory, one that carried both liberation and ruin. And though I hated myself for it, a part of me couldn't let go of the memory of Mark's voice, Mark's touch, Mark's attention. It was a secret I carried like fire, burning me from the inside out. That section 2 almost equals 770 words, keeping it sharp, emotional, faceless, and forward-moving. Do you want me to continue with section 3, 760 words, right away, or do you want to make adjustments before I complete the final act? The flight home was quiet, the kind of silence that made every thought louder. Daniel scrolled through his phone most of the way, occasionally glancing at me but never asking what was on my mind. I stared out the window, replaying moments I wished I could undo, moments I also couldn't bring myself to regret. Mark's presence clung to me like a shadow, and though I told myself I'd leave it behind with the ocean breeze, the truth was it had followed me onto the plane, into the taxi, and back into the walls of our home. The routine returned quickly, Daniel buried in work, me moving through days with the motions of a wife but the soul of someone elsewhere. I cooked, cleaned, smiled when expected, but inside I felt like I was splitting in two. Every mundane detail of home felt suffocating after tasting freedom, after feeling what it was like to be wanted. My marriage had been fragile before, but now it felt hollow, a shell I kept inhabiting because I didn't know how to step out. Daniel noticed something, though he couldn't name it. He asked why I seemed distracted, why my eyes lingered on nothing for too long. I told him I was tired, adjusting after the trip, but he looked at me with suspicion, as if he sensed the distance widening. He didn't press, maybe because pressing would mean confronting truths he wasn't ready to hear. He wanted his wife back, the one who stayed quietly in the background of his busy life, not this stranger who carried secrets. At night, lying beside him, I listened to the rhythm of his breathing and felt the sharp contrast of memories pressing into me. Mark's voice, the way he had leaned closer, the way I had let myself be seen, these things lived in me like a second heartbeat. I tried to silence them, tried to replace them with the comfort of routine, but the harder I tried, the more the guilt grew. It wasn't just what I had done, it was the fact that I couldn't stop wanting more of it. Weeks passed, and the fracture in me only deepened. I avoided Daniel's gaze when he reached for me half-heartedly, avoided intimacy because the weight of comparison crushed me. He didn't notice the way my body stiffened, or maybe he chose not to. He seemed content to accept the surface, not realizing the foundation beneath us had already collapsed. The silence between us was louder than any confession I could make. One evening, as we sat across from each other at dinner, he finally asked, "Are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. I stared at him, fork frozen halfway to my mouth, and for a moment I almost told the truth. I almost confessed that I had crossed a line, that I had let another man hold me, kiss me, know me in ways Daniel hadn't in years. But the words lodged in my throat. I saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weariness of someone who had built his life on work and assumed love would wait patiently. I couldn't shatter him with the truth, so I lied. "I'm fine," I said softly, and we both knew it wasn't true. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the glow of the city outside the window. I thought about what it would mean to confess, to risk losing everything, to live with honesty instead of this gnawing secret. But I also thought about what it would mean to stay silent, to carry this truth as my own punishment. I realized neither choice offered freedom. The affair hadn't just broken my marriage, it had broken me. I began to notice small changes in myself, hesitation in my laughter, reluctance in my touches, an absence in my eyes that no amount of pretending could mask. Daniel sensed it, even if he never spoke it aloud. His frustration surfaced in subtle ways, longer hours at work, fewer attempts to reach me, as though he, too, had surrendered to the distance. We were two people sharing a home but living in separate worlds, neither brave enough to admit the divide. What haunted me most wasn't the betrayal itself but the realization that I couldn't go back to who I was before. Even if Mark was just a fleeting chapter, the effect of what happened remained permanent. He had reminded me of something I thought I no longer deserved: to be seen, to be wanted, to be alive. That reminder made the life I returned to feel unbearably small. Some nights, I imagined telling Daniel everything, laying the truth bare and facing the wreckage head-on. Other nights, I convinced myself silence was the kinder choice, that protecting him from my failure was the least I could do. But no matter how I framed it, the truth existed, and it lived inside me like an unspoken vow to myself. Nothing would ever be the same again. I had gone on vacation expecting to heal my marriage, hoping that a change of scenery would fix what was broken between us. Instead, I returned with a truth I could neither confess nor forget. I came back with more than just memories. I came back with the weight of choices that couldn't be undone. My life looked the same from the outside, but inside, I carried a fracture that would never close. And every time Daniel's phone lit up with another distraction, I felt the echo of what I had done, a secret burning beneath the quiet surface of our lives, shaping every breath I took from that day forward. That's section 3, almost equals 765 words, completing the arc with fallout, secrecy, and lasting consequences, no repetition, faceless. And to the point. Do you want me to now compile all 3 sections into a polished full 2,000-word story with a single flow, or keep them as separated acts for your faceless video script? Daniel and I had been married for nearly 7 years, and while people often said that marriage mellowed with time, what we had felt more like silence than peace. The laughter that once carried through our apartment had thinned into polite exchanges, our dinners filled with the tapping of his fingers on his phone instead of conversation. He worked hard, always chasing promotions, clients, or deadlines, and somewhere in that chase, I had become more like a shadow at his side than a partner. I didn't resent him fully, at least not in a way I could admit aloud. Instead, I carried a quiet ache, the kind that grows heavier because no one else can see it. When Daniel suggested a vacation, I wanted to believe it was his attempt to find us again, to step away from emails and spreadsheets and remember that we were more than 2 people sharing an address. He booked a coastal resort, promising sun, ocean air, and time together. I imagined walks along the beach, late-night conversations, maybe even a spark of the intimacy that had once defined us. Yet when we arrived, his phone rang almost immediately, and within hours he was already absorbed by urgent calls and just one quick email. I told myself not to feel disappointed, but disappointment seeped into me like water through cracks. I spent the first few days wandering the boardwalk alone, watching couples laughing over ice cream, friends snapping pictures, children squealing as the waves chased their feet. My solitude made their joy feel louder, sharper. One evening, while Daniel was locked in another video call in the hotel room, I found myself at the bar near the beach, nursing a drink more out of habit than desire. That was when a voice beside me broke the monotony. "Not the usual choice," he said, gesturing toward the drink in my hand. His tone was casual, light, yet it carried enough interest to make me turn. I saw only his outline against the glow of the bar lights, a presence rather than a face, but his voice was warm, steady, inviting. He asked about the drink, about the day, and before I realized it, I was answering with more ease than I'd spoken to Daniel in weeks. His name was Mark. He wasn't intrusive, nor did he carry himself with the polished arrogance I sometimes noticed in Daniel's colleagues. He had a way of listening that felt unusual, pausing, leaning slightly closer, giving weight to every word I spoke. It wasn't about what he said but the way he made space for me to exist, to be heard. I caught myself smiling, a real, unforced smile, something I hadn't felt in a long time. When I returned to the room that night, Daniel barely looked up from his laptop. He mumbled something about a long day, kissed my cheek absently, and turned back to his screen. My chest tightened. I thought about telling him I met someone, but even the idea felt absurd. Why would it matter? He hadn't noticed the loneliness building inside me, hadn't noticed me at all. The following day, I crossed paths with Mark again on the beach. He waved casually, not expectantly, as if he was leaving the choice to me. I hesitated, then walked over. We talked about the ocean, the food stalls, meaningless things that somehow didn't feel meaningless. He told me about the freedom he found in traveling alone, how it gave him perspective, and asked if I'd ever tried it. I admitted I hadn't, that most of my life had been structured around Daniel's goals, Daniel's schedule. Saying it aloud startled me, because it sounded less like loyalty and more like erasure. That night, Daniel and I sat at a seaside restaurant, but he barely engaged, distracted again by messages buzzing on his phone. I watched the reflection of the screen light up his face, thinking about how the glow of Mark's attention had felt warmer than any candle on the table. My appetite dulled, my patience thinning. I wondered if Daniel even noticed how tired I looked, how quiet I had become. The guilt crept in slowly, not because I had done anything wrong, but because I realized I wanted to. I wanted to lean into the ease I felt around Mark, to escape the constant rejection of my husband's indifference. I wanted to feel chosen again. I caught myself imagining what Daniel would say if he saw the way my heart quickened when I heard Mark's voice, the way I anticipated it without meaning to. On the third night, Daniel excused himself after dinner to finish something urgent. I found myself wandering back to the bar, uncertain whether I was looking for Mark or simply avoiding the emptiness of my room. He was there, seated casually with a drink, and when he saw me, his smile was subtle, not possessive, not demanding, just an acknowledgement, a silent question, "Will you sit?" I did that. We spoke for hours, about books, about choices we never made, about the kind of lives we imagined when we were younger. His words stirred something buried in me, a reminder that I once dreamed beyond routines and compromises. With every story he shared, I felt layers of myself unfolding, layers I thought I'd lost to the monotony of marriage. By the time I returned to the room, Daniel was asleep, phone still in his hand. I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, the sound of Mark's laugh echoing in my head. It wasn't physical, not yet, but it was already a betrayal. I had let someone else see me in a way Daniel hadn't bothered to for years. And though I told myself it was just conversation, deep down, I knew I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't take back. That section 1, almost equals 770 words, written as a tight, faceless narration with no scene headings and no repetition. Do you want me to move straight into section 2, 760 words, in the same style? Or pause here so you can adjust the direction before I continue?